Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné and these are the stories making headlines across the continent. At least 176 people killed in Sudan this week alone as the fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces intensifies. Felix Tshisekedi calls to consider constitutional reform in a speech to parliament. The opposition says the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo is just attempting to stay in power beyond the two-term limit. No more Senegalese peanuts on international markets as Senegal suspends its export. As Africa's third largest producer, the government wants to increase processing at home, a new policy also aimed at countering China. So we start in Sudan, where at least 176 people were killed in a few days of army and paramilitary strikes across the country. Both warring parties have targeted densely populated civilian areas. On Monday, the Sudanese army's airstrike hit a market in the town of Kabia, in which more than 100 people were reportedly killed. The bombing was described as horrific. Matthew Marie-Carouchet reports.
A single shell was enough to destroy this commuter bus in the city of Omdurman on Tuesday, killing all of its passengers. The Sudanese army said scores died in the heavy artillery fire, with the governor of the state of Khartoum denouncing the attack as an act of terrorism. He blamed the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary organization locked in war with the Sudanese armed forces for nearly 2 years.
This targeting, instead of being directed at our heroes on the front lines, is aimed at innocent civilians during their everyday lives, whether on public transport or in markets. This is an attack on the people, while war should be fought on battlefields and with regular forces.
The artillery fire in Omdurman came one day after an airstrike on a busy market in North Darfur, in which a human rights organization said more than 100 people were killed. The emergency lawyers group attributed this strike to the Sudanese armed forces, which has been increasing military pressure on the half of the country controlled by the Rapid Support Forces. Nonetheless, on social media, the Sudanese armed forces denied responsibility for the deaths at the market.
Some political parties affiliated with the RSF terrorist militia spread lies after each targeting of rebel activity sites by our forces. The armed forces affirm that they continue to exercise their legitimate right to defend the country.
War broke out in April 2023 when the Sudanese army accused its former ally, the Rapid Support Forces, of attacking bases across the country. The war has already claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced more than 11 million people, provoking one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history. Ceasefire efforts have stalled, and the conflict continues to grow increasingly bloody.
And meanwhile, in Uganda, Sudanese refugee women are fighting to raise a feminist voice on the war and rebuild their lives. The Guardians Association was born in Sudan and regrouped in Kampala. These merchants and intellectuals are maintaining a long tradition of mutual aid among Sudanese women from abroad while engaging in their country's politics. Clément Di Roma went to meet them.
In Uganda's capital, dozens of Sudanese refugee women gather every weekend. Rania fled Khartoum a year ago, like most of these women.
We can help each other because even people here in Kampala, they need help. Either direct or indirect way. Emotionally, you need help. You need support because you're here lonely. You know that person needs help. You can help this person, you see? So it's kind of as if you are seeing Sudan here. It's kind of a small Sudan for us.
The Al Harisat Association, which translates to Guardians in English, is hosting a film screening about Dominican political activists. This event is an opportunity for Hadia to emphasize the power of women's voices. She's one of the leaders of this feminist group, founded in 2018 at the start of the Sudanese revolution.
Life in Sudan over the past 30 years has been closely linked to the leadership of women. Throughout the period before the war, we as women were in leadership roles, and it's natural that now, at a time when we're trying to achieve peace and restore the path of democratic civilian transition, women should be at the forefront.
For these refugees often turned away elsewhere, Uganda is a haven of peace. Kampala even encourages Sudanese women to settle and start businesses. Asia has launched a pharmaceutical venture with her family. She too has joined the Guardians Association.
It's very important for us to find a women leader. She feels what's your concern, she can understand you well, and it's also give you hope. We can survive, we can succeed, we can help each other.
The Guardians have built a network where each woman can find work, like Asia's cousins who work in this restaurant.
It's one of the war benefits, maybe. We feel what other ladies suffering from. We feel their struggle. We want to help them as much as we want them to help us.
Despite building new lives in Uganda, the Sudanese woman's wish remains the same, to one day return home in peace.
And in other news, in brief, Niger was hit by one of its deadliest attacks in 6 months. Nearly 100 Nigerian soldiers were killed in a clash with jihadists in a terror region on the west in the country. 50 civilians were also killed in the exchange of fire. An emergency meeting was held this Wednesday morning with the Chief of the Armed Forces, General Musa Salau Bourmou. And France started the withdrawal of its military from Chad with the departure of 2 warplanes that were based in the capital, N'Djamena. Chad had been France's last foothold in the wider Sahel region after Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. But 2 weeks ago, a decision was announced to end a defense accord with Paris. France, until then, had about 1,000 troops in the country. Now, Amnesty International is accusing senior Congolese army officers of possible crimes against humanity in a massacre that happened on August 30th last year in Goma. A report says 56 people were killed, mostly members of the natural Judaic and Messianic faith towards the nations. Their leader had called a protest to demand the departure of foreign NGOs and the UN force from the area. The army opened fire on a crowd. Amnesty says the death toll could actually be over 100.
It was a result of a well-prepared operation that unfortunately followed an explicit request from the UN to the Congolese authorities to prevent this protest from taking place. This is a massacre that was committed by the Congolese army, which is supposed to protect the people, not to kill. They could be doing even worse in places where they are not being watched.
And staying in the DRC, President Felix Tshisekedi gave an address to Parliament, hailing the progress his administration has made and reiterating his call to change or revise the constitution. Emmett Livingston in Kinshasa has more.
President Felix Tshisekedi took to the podium on Wednesday in Congo's National Assembly building with his supporters chanting songs and waving their hands in the air. This was his annual address to the nation, and he used the occasion to highlight progress made. The economy is due to grow 6% this year, Tshisekedi said, and the government is building thousands of kilometres of roads. But the president didn't deliver only good news. Conflict is still raging in eastern Congo, and 7 million people have been displaced. In the most hotly anticipated part of the speech, Tshisekedi also promised to pursue plans to change Congo's constitution.
It is perhaps time to launch a national debate on a constitutional reform in order to eliminate the flaws that are slowing down the functioning of our state apparatus. This approach consists solely of launching an initiative aimed at inviting our compatriots to a sincere reflection to build an institutional framework better adapted to the realities and aspirations of our people.
The president had to stop speaking at certain points, so ecstatic was the clamour from his supporters. But the crowd wasn't representative of Congo. Tshisekedi's plan to change the constitution, for example, is deeply controversial. He says the constitution should be changed to speed up government administration, among other things. But the political opposition is dead set against the plan, as is the influential Catholic Church. Many see constitutional reform as a distraction when conflict is still raging. But mostly, the opposition fears that changing the constitution will allow Tshisekedi to extend his time in office beyond the normally permitted 2 terms.
After his election, Ghana's President-elect John Mahama will be under pressure to meet the expectations of voters following his landslide victory in Saturday's election. On his agenda, solving the economic crisis, as well as tackling the issue of illegal gold mining. Ghana is the leading gold producer in Africa. But now the environmental damage that this exploitation causes has become a key concern.
Inside the noise and dust in this area, more than 2,000 young artisanal miners are hard at work. These small mines produce 45% of Ghana's gold.
I am in Galamsey because of money. There are other jobs there, but not with that money.
But 85% of these mines are operated without permit, making them illegal. For Charles, who has been able to obtain licenses for some of the units he manages here, this is a major challenge.
Some of us have no permits because the process that you go through, that make it difficult. We want the government to make it cheaper and the small-scale mining to be registered and accepted by the government.
The use of mercury, a heavy metal that is very harmful to the environment, which workers handle without protection, is another problem.
This board for washing, and after we wash on the board, we use mercury or we put mercury in it and stir it to get the particles of gold. This mercury doesn't go into the water, so we don't destroy any water over here. Some of us, they destroy water bodies, and then they need to be evacuated.
60% of the country's waterways are now polluted, to the point that the country risks importing water by 2030. In Accra, protesters have marched for weeks to demand that political parties take a stand against Galamsey.
Both leading parties, the NDC and the MPP, are involved in Galamsey. Unfortunately, the firefighters are the arsonists. The only thing that would result in a change in the way we fight Galamsey is if the citizens continue to push.
Ghana's new government would have the daunting task of winning this war that many have failed to.
It's an unprecedented decision in Senegal, the suspension of its peanuts export. This sector is one of the country's main export crops. As Africa's third largest producer, the government now wants to increase production and processing at home. And this policy is also aimed at countering China, the main buyer of Senegalese groundnuts. Our correspondent Caitlin Kelly is in Dakar.
On the outskirts of Sandiara, 100 kilometers south of Dakar, Dethier piles up his peanuts. The farmer is delighted that the government has set a new price for the popular crop at 305 West African francs, an increase of 35 from last year.
It's been years since I sold my peanuts to the States. I preferred Chinese exporters who pay much more. This year's price is really interesting. It's the first time since I've been a grower that it's been at this level. I'm really happy about it, and I'm waiting to see whether it will be respected in the field.
Dithier and his fellow farmers are glad to have more support, as authorities also distributed large quantities of fertilizer. Given the suboptimal weather conditions and low yields this year, the Ministry of Agriculture decided to suspend peanut exports, wanting to satisfy the domestic market first, before sending the crops abroad.
We had a meeting with all the key actors, and they said, if the country needs 100,000 tons of seeds and factories need 400,000 tons, then we first need to secure these 500,000 tons before authorizing exports. Under the leadership of His Excellency, the President of the Republic and the Prime Minister, we want to transform 100% of our agricultural production, not just peanuts, but all crops.
On Monday, authorities said the ban could apply to several other crops, like cashew nuts and cotton, as Senegal makes efforts to move away from reliance on other countries for processing, bolster their own export trade, and work towards greater food sovereignty.
The delicious peanuts of Senegal. And this concludes our edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching and stay tuned on France 24.